Hello, everyone. So, once again, this is a Lewis Michael show. As it is usually the case, it is a showcase of creators with their upcoming projects, and sometimes as well with interviews. And today, though, it is slightly different. We have a couple of enthusiasts with me, and they are based in Europe. So we will not be speaking about U.S. Creators or established books or upcoming projects from the U.S. We're just really going to have a little conversation about the state of the comic book industry in Europe. So with me, I have Frederic Pagano. He is mostly an aficionado for the Franco-Belgium market, which, as we all know, it is the third largest comic book industry in the world, following the Japanese one. And from Portugal, I have Paulo Costa as well. And he will speak to us about the efforts that are being made in Portugal, and maybe a little bit about Spain as well, and about other European comics as well, which have fallen into his radar, which he follows as well as a fan. Both of these two gentlemen, just before we go straight into them, have YouTube channels as well. I will leave a link for both of their channels under the title of this video. They do interesting videos once in a while regarding and speaking precisely about the content that we will be having a conversation here today. Paul actually has done quite a few videos about a series of American comics, and Frederick has just recently returned to YouTube with some lovely edited videos speaking about the art of a series of European creators. I don't know who would like to go first, but maybe I'll just pass the microphone first to Paulo for him to speak to us about what has been done in Portugal. I mean, I knew the comic book industry in Portugal, which didn't exist back in the days that I was dealing with it, and but there was always a one or two pirates that would kind of fudge into the market and come out with some interesting work. Fortunately, the publication history of sequential art in Portugal has never really dominated foreigner markets in any way or form, unfortunately. But there has been some worthwhile efforts. But Paul, he does have the knowledge, the rightful knowledge, to speak to us about whatever really is tickling his fancy right now, right there. Maybe as I was just before streaming, going through the paces, maybe Paul would just like to take us a little bit further back and just maybe in a nutshell, just speak to us about what has been done in Portugal over the years, if by any chance he has information about that. So, Paul, take it away.
Sure. When I started reading comics in the early 80s, I was 4 or 5 then, uh, there was a bit of a cultural shift. People who were born before the 1970s, they were more francophone. They would have a tendency to read more French comics, or at least comics that were published in France, since some Italian artists like some Italian series like Corto Maltese are very popular here. In fact, if you republish the old Corto Maltese books, the same people who already have a complete collection will buy it all over again. And I'm from a younger generation, and I started picking up comics from the newsstands, which the majority of them they were imported from Brazil. At first that included Disney, until they started printing the stuff here in 1983, and they finally adopted our official Portuguese grammar rules in 1987. Marvel and DC continued to be imported all the way through the 1990s until the X-Men and Spider-Man animated series from the 90s arrived here. And then there were a couple of problems with the there was a certain shift in the market, because when Marvel went bankrupt in the end of 1996, it ruined. They basically stopped all the contracts that they had. We stopped having Marvel for about a year and a half. I even bought some Bonelli comics from Italy during that time,
Hmm.
and about 2003, the main publisher of French comics, which was Mary Berica, uh, they went out of business, and it took a while until the Leia group took over. But they've been very afraid to dip their toe in the new material. They're still going with the old favorites, like republishing Asterix, republishing Lucky Luke.
Hmm.
They don't have the rights to Tintin, but they also have a few other stuff like 13 and Largo Winch. Those have been published in newspaper collections. Well, one way that the publishers have of trying to make money with comics, occasionally they will propose to a newspaper as an added sales product. They will put out a comic book collection of 10 to 15 volumes, and they will be cheaper than the material that goes to the bookstores, and it's a way of getting into the more mainstream market, uh, because some of these series usually wouldn't have enough of a mainstream appeal, and with a smaller price range, the people will be more interested in buying them. It's the same like when they had DVD collections. What that has allowed is that a bunch of new players have come into the market, and while none of them have had what you would call a very big sales success, they managed to put out books regularly, and with small print runs, they've been able to make a small profit with whatever they're publishing, and even so, we have a lot of variety right now. In fact, the majority of the output that we have in Portugal right now, is probably made up of Portuguese writers and artists, which was something that we did not have 20 years ago. Eh, if you had told 20-year-old me that nowadays half of the books that I was buying would be made by Portuguese creators, I would say you're crazy. Portuguese creators don't know how to make comics. It's like watching Portuguese movies; they suck. But no, we've had I'm not going to say explosion, but there's a lot of stuff on the market that's at least readable, and we have a lot of talented people, and many of them are even trying to get out of the country, since we're pretty small, and a few of them have already been published in the United States.
Hmm. Well, that's very interesting to know. I mean, I have read a few names coming out of Iberian Peninsula, coming out of Portugal. I mean, obviously there's a few names working right now for the big mainstream publishers of the U.S. But I've also briefly, very briefly, heard of a couple of runaway successes, like you were mentioning, of actually homemade product that has been translated and has been released. I mean, but going back in time, I remember being a kid in the 70s, and there were actual U.S. comics, so the Marvel and the DC comics being printed and published in Portugal, not looking exactly like facsimiles of the American counterparts, but very similar to what you would find in the UK. So it's basically the same title as say the Incredible Hulk or Amazing Spider-Man, the same cover number, but the format was slightly different. Obviously, the printed paper was different, but that was available in the 70s in Portugal. I do remember that because I had them. I had a collection of that my cousin had collected over his teen years, over the 70s. And then I know that in the 80s, they started reprinting that again. Again, it was the comic book format, the actual US comic book format. And I remember those even better because those I bought myself. And it was the original run of Spider-Man by Ditko, and the original run of the first issues where Thor was, so Journey into Mystery, and they were publishing as Portuguese as Thor number 1 and number 2, and I can't remember who was publishing that. I know he lasted for a few years.
Yeah, the in the 70s it was
No,
APR.
this is already in the 80s. This is
In the
already in
80s
the
it
80s.
was Distri, at least for 8 issues on
Yep.
Thor and the Hulk.
Yep.
And Spider-Man, I think, went on for a little while. It was in 1983,
Hmm.
which was when Editora Abril landed on the Portuguese shores from
Yes.
Brazil. Having the Brazilian leftovers was actually very good for us because
Yeah.
um, they published a lot of stuff, and what didn't sell there, they would just ship over here, and it
Huh.
was enough. There was a lot of variety, and we could buy it. It was everything that they published in terms of Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
Um, there was the Brazilian comics made by Mauricio de Souza. There was
Hmm.
also the Disney stuff eventually was made here. It was printed here. It was assembled there, and eventually we even got some stuff like Marvel graphic novels, which were published in a large magazine, and stuff
Yes.
from First Comics and from Eclipse Comics. That's how I first found out about Rocketeer. I have the
Hmm.
Brazilian graphic novel.
Hmm. Well, the Brazilians have always been in the forefront of producing. Well, first of all, great artists. They do have cartoons, schools, colleges dedicated to sequential art. So a lot of it's a really rich, growing ground for this kind of art, and obviously that also spreads into their publishing arms. And I do remember those Brazilian editions. They were kind of small books, kind of pocket-sized books, but they were great because, like you just mentioned, they had like 3 or 4 issues inside. So each one of those books would equal 2 or 3 of the regular standard size American comics. The funny thing was that I was lucky enough to own the actual original US comics as they were coming out back in the late 70s and the early 80s, and then actually having the Portuguese editions, and after that the Brazilian editions was actually quite interesting because unfortunately the paper stock, as we all know, that Marvel and DC were using in the late 70s, but especially throughout the early 80s, was of very poor quality. So it was print stock, newspaper print stock, and unfortunately, the printing they were using and the paper itself does not live up to an old life. I'm afraid on the shelves. Those comics, literally, unless you really have a very well taken care of copy, which has been always preserved inside a specific bag, after all these years, you literally open the book and the pages, well, besides of going all yellow, just like a proper newspaper, the ink has just completely kind of eaten through the pages. So you kind of look at one page, but you're actually reading five because everything you can see through it. Funny enough, both the Portuguese editions and the concurrent Brazilian editions, they were employing a better quality paper because obviously their numbers were not as big, so they could afford a slightly better quality of stock. And in terms of a collector, those are actually much more worthwhile keeping it because although they're not the original publication and they're not in the original language, they actually they last the ages, and you can actually still go through those little books and enjoy it, while the Americans, now we're speaking in terms of a collector, while the American uh, copies, again, unless you get a very good quality one, they have age in a sinister way, if I could say that. um, I know that in the 90s, I was no longer collecting any of the Brazilian editions or the Portuguese. I think I stopped collecting them in the late 80s because in the late 80s, I was collecting only the actual U.S. originals, because they had improved their paper quality. That was one of the reasons. And throughout the 90s, obviously, once Image comes out, the paper stock changes for everybody. 94, 95, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the paper stock used by the Americans was completely different from 10 years before. And by then, I think somebody else was doing the Portuguese versions, isn't it? Because by then Abril had kind of disappeared, or they start making this again back to the U.S. format, and they were compiling as well 2 or 3 issues in each. But by then I was collecting the back to the original, so I really can't remember exactly who was doing that, but I think you mentioned it earlier on. It was a Portuguese publisher, I think.
Yeah, in 2000, it was Devir. Devir started in Brazil as well, but they were an RPG game store. That's how they got into Portugal. They still have an RPG game store in Lisbon. They still have a publishing arm. Right now, they have the rights to some of the Alan Moore stuff, like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and From Hell. They've been dipping their toes into manga, like Assassination Classroom.
Hmm.
But the guy who was their main editor has moved on. Is now with another publisher, G. Floy, who is actually now the main publisher of American comics in Portugal, but always in collected editions in hardcover. Right now, we don't have any comics on the newsstands anymore,
Hmm.
because the publisher of Disney and Marvel comics went out of business. They were owed a lot of money from when their previous distributor went bankrupt, and they announced late last year that
Right.
they were going to stop. So now we no longer have Disney or Marvel in the newsstands, leaving us
Right.
only with bookstore material.
Right. Okay. Well, actually, that was going to be my next question before we would take it on to the books that are being produced right now and the authors you are, I'm sure, itching to share with us. But
Hmm.
my next question was going to be actually where comics are being sold right now, because I know when I left the Portugal market, I was one guy that was friends with the people that actually made the first dedicated comic book shop, which was open in a traditional area in Lisbon. But first, they started at book fairs. Actually, first they started in the cellar of the mother of one of them, and this was bang in 1991, 1992, and we were going there just to pick up our U.S. Copies, and then they opened a store later on in that decade in Lisbon. But before we go into that, I just wanted to pass the word to Frederick. Wanted to be able to balance out this act here, because obviously Frederick is sitting there, and now I was basically passing on to him the same question I asked Paulo. So obviously Franco-Belgian comics, I mean graphic novels and all that. I mean this was a art that took over Europe back in the 60s, and even throughout the 70s was very influential. Um, Throughout the 80s, also great names still spilled out. Eventually, for me and for a lot of people that are fans of this art, uh, we believe that Franco-Belgian comics again kind of took a back seat came the 90s. And a lot of us it went into some sort of limbo regarding what is produced in France and mainly in Belgium. Now, I am sure it's still a powerhouse, but maybe you like to bring us up to pace to what has been done since the 90s there. So let's say in the last 25 years, 30 years. So, Frederick, I'll pass on the word to you. And obviously, Frederick is first language is not English. He will do his best, but as much as you can tell us, what has been the line of the industry, the up and downs since the 90s, which was when I actually stopped reading, unfortunately, the Franco-Belgian comics. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Uh, and yes, English is not my first language, and sorry, it will. I'm sure you will hear it, but I'm going to do my best. Um, um, well, I think I can tell you what is the industry right now, and maybe I will get back in the 90s, yes, in the 90s and in the year 2000. But today, if you want to know, we have sold um, 44 million comics last year,
Wow.
was more than the year before. So you can say it's great. And if you want to know, the we publish more than 5,000 new comics last year. It's a lot too.
Hmm.
And we can say, everything's okay. Well, maybe not, because if you see the best sellers last year, the first one, donc the best seller is Lucky Luke, the new one.
Hmm.
Lucky Luke was a classic. Was a classic. Lucky Luke was born 50 years ago, I think, or maybe more. We celebrated his birthday last year. And the second one, bestseller, was Blake Mortimer, the new one, because and Blake Mortimer is a classic too. It's an old comics, and it's a problem. It's very a problem because you can have the feeling that only old comics are bestsellers,
Hmm.
and um, it's if you want to, it's it's because you have readers who read from this shell out the comics books. So there's a new one, they buy it to complete the collection. Okay, it's more, but uh, they don't ask if the comics is good or not. They just want to have the last one because they complete the collection.
Right.
Right. And well, I told you we published 5,000, more than 5,000 comics last year. Imagine you come in a comics book, in comic shop, sorry, and the first thing you have on the wall, front of you, is a wall with 5,000 news comics. You can. It's hard for you to know what can I what can what can I choose. So you go to what you know.
Hmm.
So the classic, Lucky Luke, Blake Mortimer, well, Tintin, it's another problem. Spirou et Fantasio, and other. And the problem is also for the artists, you know, writers and runners, because 5,000 new comics books, of course, they are there are a lot of them does not sell, are not, nobody bought it because I'm pretty sure uh, I, I've seen less than 1% of the new comics books last year. I'm pretty sure because there's too much, and the comic shop cannot show all the new and you have small publishers who publish maybe 4 or 5 new comics a year, and they are not they are too, they are little they are too small
Hmm.
uh, to um, to sell a lot of comics.
Hmm.
Do you understand what I mean?
Well, I mean, I'll just make an apart here, actually, without wanting to sound pretentious to some of the viewers we will be having, but sometimes we have a younger generation coming to this channel. Like, I'm sure they go around the YouTube just looking for a comic book related channels, looking on how most of them on interest on how to actually start doing their own narrative art, so both the writing and the art for a comic book. And just for anyone outside of Europe, and again, this is something on the side, like the footnotes of what we're talking about. And Frederick is, I'm quite happy if you want to correct me from whatever I'm going to say, but just for anyone coming outside of Europe, just to give them a clear idea of what we are talking about. So when in US, and this again, this is 101 of comic books. For any veteran, this is completely superfluous. But comic books in US, we have periodics. They come out monthly. Sometimes they come out every 2 months. And you have teams working on it. You have a couple of writers, a couple of artists, pencilers, inkers, and all that, letters, and everything is put together digitally, and pow, here comes out the book on sale for 30 days until it's replaced by the next issue. Okay, now what we're talking about here, mostly in Europe, is a completely different bag. So first of all, you have the periodical comic book, so the so-called funny book that is a kind of a medium size format, stapled together,
Yeah.
well printed, fair enough. But in Europe, that's mostly not what we're talking about. And again, Frederick can correct me. I'm not sure if they're selling the floppies now.
Italy is the exception. The Bonelli Comics is still depends mostly on newsstand sales from series like Tex, Zagor, or Dylan Dog. But most of the series are not selling as well as they used to be. Of course, a lot fewer people are going to the newsstands nowadays.
Hmm. Yes, but basically, yeah, exactly. Obviously, here in Europe, there's more focus, and again, this will correlate to my other question that I was going to reach to Paulo about. But most of the audience and most of the distribution here is done in bookshops. They're not so much comic book focused shops. I know France obviously is full of them. And again, like I was just mentioning to Paul before I went to Frederic, in Portugal, there's already a couple of them there. Spain also has some. Italy has some. But it's a very small percentage of the entire market. While obviously in the US, you have a series of properly dedicated comic book shops because it is an industry on itself. I
Yes.
mean, the comic book shop on its own. So what you have here in Europe is what we call, and everyone will know that we'll call them albums. So they're hardcover books or paperback format books, usually no less than 40 pages, which for US standards would equal a double size issue. And the format itself is physically longer, bigger. It's like a magazine format, what is considered traditionally the magazine format, and sometimes bigger, much bigger than that. And the people that work in the comic book industry in Europe, they also work under a different fashion. So it's not so much a hired team by a particular company like Image or Marvel or DC or whatever.
Yeah.
That's probably what we can call authors. They're authors. They're doing their stuff. They probably come out with one album per year, speaking very broadly, and they make their living like that. So the book, the concept, it's purchased by a particular publisher and he's released as such, like you would release a Stephen King novel. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's mostly the format in Europe. So we're not talking about periodicals on the stands that have to shift after a month. I'm not denigrating the work of the people that work for Marvel. Obviously, all that takes a lot of work, but is a different thing in Europe. So that's why you have still artists kind of working solo, sometimes painting the comic book board by hand because they can afford that time. They have a year to come out with a book. Obviously, I'm sure that if they can squeeze more work into a year, they'll be quite happy to come out with 2, 3, or 4 albums and obviously make 3, 4 times the money. But again, this is just an aside for anyone coming from the outside and kind of thinking European comics. What is that? Is that something that looks like an Archie comic? No, I mean it's a different concept. But then
Yeah.
again, I'll pass on the word to Frederic, which will obviously have more to say about this.
Yeah. So, like, yeah, if you want to, in Europe, um, you the characters owns to the authors, the writer and the drawiner, not the publisher. So
Exactly.
the so the writer can decide, I change my publisher because I'm not I, I do not agree with the condition with my publisher. But so the thing is, if you want to make a career in comics, you have to sell comics, because more you sell, more you get money. And with more than 5,000 new comics book a year, for most of the authors, it's hard. It's very hard to have money. A few days ago, a well-known droner said that young people come to see him and ask, "Can I make a career in comics?" And he said, "Yes, for the droning, you okay, but get another job, because maybe you won't live with your comics, because it became very, very hard to live making comics." And it's something which in the past there were not a lot of writers and drawers, so you have less new comics books, and people buy it, and the authors can get money and can live. Today it's very hard, and yesterday I've seen a young droner on Twitter saying, I'm done. Next year I stop, because she for a 6-month work she get more than 30 euro
Wow.
for a 6-month work. So all this what we call author's right.
Mhm.
Um, she only get 30 more than 30 euros to live. It's impossible. So she said, I stopped. Next year I stop. It's not possible anymore.
No.
And that's the problem. When I understand, when I was a child, I dreamed making comics, and a lot of people dream too. They were dreaming, we are going to make comics. We will be the new Hergé, the new André Franquin, and all. So, but the problem is there is too much world, too much people now working in here. So, and we don't have more people to buy that, because the other problem is children right now does not read comics, French-Belgian comics. They do not read anymore.
Right.
Maybe mangas and US comics. I'm going to, because Marvel makes films.
Yes.
I think it helps that you have children. They've seen films, Marvel Cinematic Universe, so they see the comics in the supermarket, and they take it, they read it, and yes, mangas, so Asian comics. Yes, it's the same phenomenon, because in the 90s, there were, I was a child, there were Japanese cartoon, and it was a huge success. People were crazy about these cartoons, Dragon Ball Z, Senseiya, and so
Yes.
and so people grow up, and now they have the mangas. They can buy it, read it, and little by little, we've seen that French-Belgian comics book, they start to lose readers, and it's a great problem, because if you don't have new readers, at the end you won't sell comics, and so you will disappear.
Yes.
So yes, and I'm not. People said, before you have Hergé with Tintin, you have André Franquin with Spirou and Fantasio and Gaston, other one. Um, you have Goscinny Uderzo for Asterix. You have Maurice with Lucky Luke.
Mhm.
Uh, another guys, Jean Robert for Boulet Bill, etc., etc. And they said after that we don't have great creators like them. I do not agree with that. We still have we had and we still have great comics authors.
Yeah. Well,
Rarely,
before we go into those, which I'm sure you would like to share them, obviously, there's always been a golden age for everything, and obviously in terms of the Franco-Belgium comics, golden age was definitely back in the 50s and throughout the 60s and the 70s with the names you already mentioned. So Hergé with Tintin and Lucky Luke and Asterix. Fortunately, all those gentlemen are gone. And actually, when you were mentioning those comics in the beginning, when you said there's a new one coming out, or for example, Spirou or Black and Mortimer. One question: are those series? I know Tintin is finished. Obviously, once the RJ estate, I believe they won't allow any more anyone else to pick up the mantle. But I know that Uderzo was still going with Asterix, even though obviously Goscinny has passed a long time ago. I can't remember if Uderzo is still with us, but I know that Maurice with Lucky Luke, I believe there's still ongoing series with a new team of artists. Is this true?
yes, 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 yes.
Excellent.
But by example, you talk about Uderzo,
Hmm.
and a few years ago, he decided to stop because he was old, he was sick, so he
Right.
didn't.
Okay.
He decided to stop. But for the publisher, it wasn't possible. It could Asterix couldn't stop because for money, of course.
Very
He
true.
needs Asterix. He needs us. So they hired two new authors to
Hmm.
make new Asterix, and so there are three new Asterix uh, with this new team.
Hmm.
And well, personally, it's good.
Hmm.
It's not a masterpiece, but they are good.
I
Uh,
have to say that I would like very much to do a show just on Asterix. I mean, Goscinny for me was probably one of the greatest comic book writers ever. I mean, the man was a genius of comedy, and it's amazing the legacy that Uderzo leaves behind. So many years working, and his style, has very rarely gone down in quality. Never for me, it's almost indistinguishable between well, fair enough, between the first two albums there was a little bit more of warming up to it. But once they start rolling both of them and they make all the classic albums, really until just recently, from when I stopped knowing what he was doing, as I just mentioned, I didn't even knew any longer if we're still alive, which happily I'm just got the confirmation from you that he's still with us. But he kept his line really solid throughout the years. But that would be a very big show. Maybe Frederick would like to do a show on Uderzo and Goscinny one day, and I'll be quite happily promote that episode.
yeah,
Um, but just before, I would like to ask you about the new generation of authors, and like what you just mentioned, which I'm flabbergasted by the girl, the artist, the drawer that cannot make a living, even though obviously she probably owns the rights to the book and is being published. I just have a couple of questions regarding how the actual market is physically arranged in throughout France in terms of the sales side, the sales point. Before I pass to Paul for him to start sharing uh, the books that you would like to introduce to us. But the questions I have for you, Frederick, is this. First one, in France as it is in Belgium, I are the comics. When we talk about comics, we'll talk about specifically the Franco-Belgian albums, the bande dessinées, the work that is done in France and Belgium. Are those books still mainly on sale in bookshops and comic book shops? And the other question, which you kind of partially already answered, is in those shops, especially the dedicated ones, so the comic book shops only, do they have to? They obviously have to share space with the American comics and the Japanese comics. But how is in terms of the friction? How much ground can those American comics and Japanese comics concede to the European comics, or the other, arranging the question a different way, since since they're playing at home, how much space do they have to concede for American comics and Japanese comics? How much retail space they have to concede? And the question can be asked in a different way. So are the Franco-Belgian comics, which is a massive industry, like you started this program by mentioning the numbers, the sales numbers from last year, are they losing out the battle? Obviously, we understand the kids want to buy associated merchandise that is associated with movies. So obviously, they want to buy a couple of American comics and even the Japanese comics, which are still quite popular on TV with anime and all that. But since it is becoming so difficult for the European authors to be able to establish themselves in the market, where do you see this competition going? Is it a losing ground? Is it a losing battle? Or is there some ways that the Franco-Belgian albums can still assert themselves in their own market? I'm not sure if you understand the question, if it's a kind of a double side question, but I'll give you time to think about it.
Okay. Well, so yes, there are comic shop dedicated to comics, but less than before, because it's it's hard. It's very hard. You have supermarket who sell comics too, and so it can happen. But we still have a comic shop, and because, like I said, here in Belgium and in France, there are a lot of people still love comics and French Belgian comics, the old one, the new one, exactly. And yeah, yes, of course, if you want to survive, you have to adapt. And the the audience today reads American comics, Japanese comics, so you have to give a space for these books. And well, but yes, we concede. If you well, when I was a child in the 90s, when I go to the supermarket, I don't remember Japanese comics or American comics in supermarkets. There were all French Belgian comics, and today you have more, more than and more. You have Japanese comics and American comics. Well, but I don't know what will happen. It's hard to. Well, I think the publishers know that they have to react. I'm pretty sure they will react. The year, the last years, we have a lot of films about French-Belgian comics. Benoît
Yes.
Brispert, Spirou et Fantasio, Gaston, unfortunately, and so I think it's the start of the answer. So authors, well, cinema can help people to discover the characters. So let's make films, and the public will discover the characters, and they will buy the albums, and they will read French Belgian comic book. In the and I think now the problem is it's a problem. It's not a problem, but printed album
Hmm.
um, maybe become old-fashioned, and
Mm,
so you have to go little by little. You have to go to the digital books, and
right.
maybe, and I think it can be a way to interest children who do not read French Belgian comics to Be- oh, French Belgian comics.
Yes. Well, I mean that's definitely a good idea to start making film productions. I mean they've done obviously the one that everybody knows more recently that we spoke earlier on, Valerian, adapted by
Yes,
Luc Besson. Sorry,
yeah,
that's Spiro and Fantasy. Is that a live action or is it an animation?
yeah, no, in live action, yes,
Well, very cool. For example, obviously they've done the Asterix and Obelix movies with Gerard Depardieu. They were met with a 50-50. If obviously they could invest more in that and make them accessible to everyone else around the world, that would definitely help the brands. But one question just related to this, just before we go back to Paulo, would the French authors be willing to start working on themes that are usually not seen as the traditional milieu for the and again my French is a bit silly, so if I sound I throw in these words once in a while, so but usually French comics, French albums are seen more of a highbrow kind of thing, so a bit more philosophical, more dramatic, and less of the shenanigans that the Americans will do with guys in capes, or the Japanese will do with big tanks and monsters, big robots. Are probably the French authors, which are seen more as the cult side of comic books, more introspective side, more existential narratives. Will they start kind of selling out and doing comics, well, about a French superhero or a big Godzilla based in Belgium? Where do you see the narratives going in France? Because I mean, the thing that I always enjoyed about those sort of works is precisely because they're a good they're the antithesis of what I purchase from the American markets. It's almost like going to the cinema. Sometimes you feel like watching a action movie and having some popcorns, and sometimes you prefer to go to the smaller art house movie theater and watch something a little bit more, that allows you to think a little bit more. So where do you see the market going?
well, it, I know it's interesting. Um, I know. Uh, I don't know when, but I think this year or next year there will be a new Spirou uh, written by Fabien Vellman, who writes the Spirou and Fantasio Adventures, and it will be it's Spirou will be a kind of superhero with a gadget, and I think it's a clue that now uh, publisher do what it works. So comics works. So
Yes.
we do comics.
Hmm.
Um,
What sells eventually, isn't it?
uh, I don't know really. I don't. The but by example, you in Spirou magazine, you have uh, Invincible and
Oh yes.
Imbattable, pardon, Invincible
Mhm.
in Invincible, who is an American superhero, right? And but it's a it's funny stories. So and I think yes, and we have writers and runners who have read comics, Japanese, American, Japanese as well,
Mhm.
and I think they said, "Oh, wh- I want to I want to do this style. I want to do a comic like American comics or
Of
like Japanese comics." And so you have a lot of writers and runners who use Japanese style or American style. Uh, but I think it's uh, it's interesting because you have a mix, and you can have or the action side from from American comics
mhm.
with something more
A little more complex in terms
philosophic,
of narratives. Yeah.
philosophical as from French Belgian comics. Yeah, it can be a interesting mix, I think.
I think so. Yes. Well, I mean, hold on then to show us what sort of French authors have are you more happy with from the recent years. But now I'll pass on to Paul then, which it will, poor Paul has been choking there, so I'm gonna
Oh,
give
no, I had a nasty cough in the last 3 or 4 days, and it's not going away.
you had the pretzel like once George W. Bush had.
Yeah.
Got stuck in the middle of your throat.
Yeah.
Well, so as I was inviting our guests to today's show, was asking them if they would like to share the titles that they've been most recently reading, and the artists and authors and teams that they are mostly happy with from the last few recent years. So, Paul, do you have anything? Well, I'm sure you'll be sharing now, but would you have anything at hand right now that you can kind of show it to the camera, just for the people that are coming in and and want to know what's what? They, how it is. Attention span on the internet is not very big, and most people will not take notes. So if you if you have them already, they're great. If you want to grab them, then by all
Yeah.
means, just so you can
I have four
share.
piles near me,
Well,
and
wow, okay.
I don't know where to start. But first, I think I'm going to show some of stuff from some of the Portuguese creators that have been working abroad, um,
Right, okay.
or that have been doing stuff primarily in English.
Yes,
Uh,
let's first have a look at those guys that managed to break through.
yeah. For example, Miguel Montenegro. He has worked for a couple of. I'm not sure. I don't remember if he did Marvel, but I know. Yeah, he did Marvel as well. And his latest book has been published by a new publisher, Arcadia. This is a It's a bit of a science fiction anthology, a bunch of short stories that sort of exist in the same universe, but they're not connected. No, there are no continuing characters.
Mm, okay.
Miguel has a style that is very very American. So as you can see
Right.
from
Yeah.
here,
Yeah. Let me just ask you something before, because I want to fix the picture on you. So let me just first of all fix it on you. I just want to ask you something. This book that you're showing, this is a Portuguese
yeah,
publication.
it's made in Portugal. Arcadia is a
Only
new
in Portugal.
publisher.
Got it.
Uh, and this is the first one that they made in a sort of American graphic novel
S-
style,
Right.
because they have other stuff that is reprinting French stuff. I think I have They're the ones who are doing the new Agatha Christie novel adaptations into comic books, because I bought the Murder in the Orient
Oh,
Express.
oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know they were doing that.
And here's a funny thing that happened is, this is Man Plus by André Lima Araújo. It was published in the US before it was published in Portugal, until finally Kingpin Books put out the Portuguese edition last year.
Yeah.
Uh, André
Right,
wanted to do stuff.
Anyway.
He wanted to get the book published in Portugal because it didn't make sense that it wasn't available here.
right.
Uh,
But that's an actual that's actual an American thing.
yeah,
Okay.
and this was published in English by by a Portuguese small press publisher. As much as there's not much difference between small press and a big publisher, but the
Yeah.
Mighty and Lil, this is in Portuguese. This is in English. It's made by Pedro Cruz, a bit of an indie style. It's supposed to be an adventure featuring Sumerian gods.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Cool.
bit like a Thor and Loki rivalry. And this has been there's a short story based on this that was published in English by King in an anthology by Kingpin Books, which I have here, Crumbs. As
Mhm.
a small thing that Mario edited, that he made available on the previous catalog, so you could order it from previews a few years ago. Um,
And these are all Portuguese imprints, yeah?
yeah, and everybody who has worked with him and a few others that haven't been published by him have stuff here. There's a lot of, okay. This is not very good. This doesn't open very well, but let me see if I can find something that.
While you look for that, I just wanted to ask you, what are the bigger names right now? Well, you're quoting them, but in terms of the actual publishing houses, what's the imprints? Who's the guys there? Who's the top cats right now there?
Yeah, right now, G. Floy, they're actually a Danish publishing house. They're headed in Portugal by the former De Vere editor, José de Freitas. Um, they're kind of hostage of whatever the Danish want to publish, because in order to reduce printing costs, they will do a co-publishing with the Danish and Polish editions. So
Right.
if and we never have a first right of choice. So if a Danish or if the Danish or the Polish publisher already published something, they're not going back to press just so we can have a Portuguese edition, which is why we're not getting Black Hammer, even though they have the rights to do the Jeff Lemire stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Uh, and are the Portuguese publishers of comics and graphic novels, are they're actively trying to publish Portuguese authors?
A little bit, yeah. GFY, they have an agreement with Comic Heart. Comic Heart have a they basically do the packaging, and they give it to GFY, and the GFY they published. In fact, they have a book right here. I'll show it in a minute. And the other one, Kingpin Books, which is owned by one of the local comic shops I go to. They kind of kickstarted the interest in Portuguese authors, um, because we didn't really like what the Portuguese were doing. A lot of them were too much high art, or attempted to be, and they started by doing some things that were fun to read, and they Mario has been diversifying the product. Although the new book that they're putting out is in association with G. Floyder. It's being presented this weekend at the Coimbra BD
Uh-huh.
convention. It's a small convention. It has a few art exhibits. There's going to be 3 or 4 new books that are going to be introduced to the market there. Mario I haven't talked to Mario about it, but he may have less time because he changed locations for his store last year, and the store is much bigger now, much nicer. It's actually next door to the Church of Scientology in Lisbon.
Wow. It's got to do a comic about that.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to ask you, how many comic book shops are now in the country, nationwide?
Um,
Dedicated shops.
about half a dozen.
After that, by the way, the guys that I was mentioning earlier on that I was in connection with there, it was as far as my knowledge goes, like I mentioned, the first dedicated comic book shop in Portugal, and it was called Bedemania, which was in, and still is, in Chiado, right there on
It
the
still
top of
is,
the
yeah.
street. Yeah, and they were the first guys. I know they opened another one in Porto, which I don't know if they closed down in the meanwhile. Again, I've been long time.
No, they sold it to their associate there. It's called Mundo Fantasma. I'm not
Right,
exactly sure if it's still there. I think it's still there. The other comic shop in Lisbon is Kingpin Books.
right, and those are those guys.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, I mean,
they
finally,
began.
someone doing what I was trying to do back in the 80s. So it's an actually in print, specialized in local authors. And well, okay, fair enough. We were doing a very undergrounded ish kind of stuff. So a lot of titillation, a lot of violence. But hey, that's what sells, huh? So
Yeah,
quality though was a bit dubious.
yeah. I'm going to show some stuff from Comic Heart now. This is about a barbarian warrior. The story is not much. It's fun, and I think it was mostly put together as an afterthought. It's called Hanuram the Golden. Not sure if there's going to be a second book. I hope there is.
Mhm.
But the guy's got talent, and I hope he does more with this.
Right. That's all traditional or digitally painted. That looks
Uh,
good.
I think this is digitally. A lot of them do digital stuff nowadays. It's
Mhm,
faster.
mhm.
And the new one that's done by the main G Floyd translator, Dragomant.
Right. Okay.
This also looks good.
I have those books been already kind of distributed internationally with
Yeah,
translated into
these
different
two. I
languages.
know that these two have English language editions, but I don't know how much they're making sure they're made available.
Mm. And I was getting in touch with a few people, some Portuguese creators, and they were precisely, and again, that's the focus of today's show, the state of the industry, and they were mentioning that the few comic cons that exist in Portugal, they're actually closing down, and they were very specific about it. So there is one in Lisbon, there is one in Porto, and I think the one in Porto was actually closing down. Now, I have seen some of your videos on the Coimbra one, and obviously, I came to realize that maybe they were partially incorrect. That there are kind of sprinkled here and there. There's a few smaller cons in Portugal. So really, what's the panorama right now? I mean, obviously, you should have at least in the capital, you should have a big major Comic Con, not just for the George Clooney to come and promote his movie, but to actually have an access to for the local creators to have what is called the artist alley, and to kind of try to push the national product, the national books, and what you've been sharing right there, they look great, at least in terms of format and printing quality, they look amazing.
Mhm.
So how many cons right now there is in Portugal? Are they there to just to show off what is being done by Dark Horse, or are they're promoting Portuguese creators?
The conventions sort of exist to launder public money.
Oh
Uh,
wow. Well, this is went in a completely mixed.
so there's a Comic Con branded event which was in Porto and it came down to Lisbon last year, which I'm not going to because like the Comic Con branded events in other places, they're 99% not comics and 1% comics. They and since this is Portugal, they usually bring the the secondary and guest artists from well-known TV series. We used to have the guy that played Captain Drake in Arrow. He came 3 years ago, I think, and one or two minor actors from Game of Thrones.
Right.
But the comic book people say they're well taken care of, but Artist Alley, you kind of have to go through all of the TV stuff in order to get to where the comics are. And I haven't been to one Comic Con. I think the ticket is too expensive for what I want to do there, and I'm really not interested in the actors, so
Yeah.
I'm not going there for books. Now the biggest convention is still the oldest one. It's the Amadora BD.
Yes.
They model themselves after the Angoulême model, so they have a lot of stuff spread throughout the city. But everybody only goes to the main hub, where they have about 50%. The most important exhibits are there, and then they kind of pile all the shops and publishers in the same place, and they have to fight for space. What they usually end up doing is that they save new releases for the Amadora event. It's 3 weekends. The exhibits are open throughout the week, so that schools can have school trips there, and then they look at the art and they have no idea what they're looking at. Um, but the Amadora event is owned outright by the Amadora City Hall, and
Hmm.
so they're free to spend as much money as they want. It's not about profit. Coimbra is small time. It's organized in a chapter of the local library,
All right.
so it doesn't take up much room. And then there's a few here and there. I like to go to Beja because I can stay at my uncle's house, so I don't have to pay for a hotel. And it also uses a public building, and it's more about the exhibits. But since a lot of publishers and Portuguese authors like to go there just for the gastronomy,
All right.
which is
Why not?
yeah, yeah. At least they're away from Lisbon for a weekend. There's a few others here and there. Moura is usually mentioned, but they don't do much. Sometimes they have local contests for local artists, but they are not involved with the main publishing.
Without wanting to bog these down into obviously talking about the smaller towns, which for anyone outside of Europe or even well outside of Portugal will kind of being a bit redundant. We're just trying to put everything in the same bag. So all these smaller cons, just out of curiosity, and kind of correlating to my question, are they well? Besides trying to support local talent, is it a good port of call for both an aficionado and an aspiring author or a creator that has product that wants to shift the product, wants to sell the product? Are these places worthwhile for the national artists and national creators to actually put their small press books on sale there? I mean, obviously, the bigger cons we always understand they need to have those multimedia events to be able to sponsor, the space, and they need to have the actors and the TV shows and all that because like comic book shops, the major ones is about now merchandise, and the books kind of take a side seat. But for the smaller cons, here in UK, for example, they're very popular, and they're the perfect place. I mean, it's the only place really where a local comic book creator can actually have their books on sale for the public because he's not going to be able to get them into a comic book shop or a traditional bookshop, and failing the online venue, direct sales over their web space. Really, the smaller conventions, which are all over the UK, from Scotland to the south and Wales, they're great places for that. So you go there, and yeah, you will find the retailer selling US stuff, and you probably even might find a couple of French books as well. But they're the majority of the space is actually taken over by the local imprints. Is the same happening there? Because I noticed in your video of the Coimbra con that the stuff on the tables was mostly national talent, wasn't it so?
A bit. It just happens that the main organizer of the Coimbra event, also owns the Coimbra comic shop, and he works with G Floyd on translating. G Floyd also does another thing: the collections that are assembled in Spain by Levoir for the newspapers. They get republished here, and they work, and they work on the and he works on those with GFly. So you can basically put the stuff in with the things that he sells at his shop. um, and it's also they can have the opportunity to sell a few books because the artist is there, and they can get an autograph. So, and since unlike the United States, here autographs are free, sketches are free. Everybody likes to have an autograph for a book they just bought.
Yeah, not to worry about the bottom dollar around here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the books already cost 15, 20, 25 euros. So
Right.
you're not going to ask for 10, for another 10 for a sketch. 25 is already a great investment for a person who doesn't read comics very often. So uh, if so,
Absolutely.
they're not gonna ask for that, especially because in a lot of cases, since the event is sponsored by City Hall, they have free room and board. They expenses taken care of. So it would not do good for the convention's customers to feel like they're being fleeced.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned the south of the country, the center of the country, and how about the north? So nothing in Porto, which is a wonderful city, by the way.
Yeah, Porto was left orphan when the Comic Con left, and
Right. Okay.
maybe they'll try to do something again of a smaller size. A few people who have worked with Devere, they're still there. They can probably try to do something. They usually don't travel. I haven't talked to them in a while since they haven't come to Amadora in
Mhm.
quite a number of years.
Okay. Well, let me just pass back to Frederic, which has been hopefully listening to us, discovering the
Very
shenanigans in
interesting.
Portugal. And yes, do you have any books you would like to share? Then this is the moment for it. Um, and of the current top of the cream in Belgium and France that is coming out with albums that your favorite ones from recent years, or maybe even already for from this last year or this year even. If you have anything to share, you can hold it up to the camera and take us through what you like most about it.
Okay, so first one. This is Seul, Alone in English, I will say, by Fabien Vellman and Bruno Gazzotti. I personally, yeah, I think it's the best comics from the last years. Really, it's amazing. I never read something like that. The pitch is you have five children who wake up morning and the city is empty. No more adults. No any anyone. Everyone disappeared, and so they try to understand what's happened, where the people go, and it's amazing, really. I don't want to say too much because no spoiler, but it's amazing, really. And I think Fabien Vellman is probably one of the best comics writers right now, and if not, he is the best. That,
Mhm.
and
By the way,
another,
that's a lovely dust cover that that book has. It kind of looks like is that a chrome cover? It's very
uh,
nice. I mean, the title looks like he's the title Soul. He looks like he's shiny, so it looks like he's got chrome in there in that cover, which is something the Americans like to do in their
it's
books.
white. It's white, and I show you.
Yes, a little bit of the interior art, please. Yes, lovely. Uh, yeah, that's it. We can see it better like that. Yes, that's nice.
Yes, uh, it's yeah. The the drum is classical. Yeah, it's really French Belgian.
Yeah, well, you see right there on that page on your on your left, that empty space there between the panels. That's a traditional thing that in Europe is done. The pacing of the speed of the narrative, which is something the Americans will dislike. They like to see every part of a page covered as much as possible by art. They don't like to see any empty spaces, any
Like
gutters.
I said, it's a classic. If you maybe here in this one. Well, no, in the can you have to you have also this kind. That's in another. It's a science fiction comics from a French Didier Tarquin. It's a French, yeah, and you see, it's more. You have
Hmm.
it's great.
That's a lovely first
You
panel.
have really now you have this kind of drawers in Belgium and France who use all the page and not only a part of. So second one, another I think one of the best writer in the industry right now, Fabien Nury, and so Katanga. It happened. The pitch is we are in the 60s, and Congo become independent, and Katanga, who is a part of Congo, asked for his independence too. And it's about jewels that people want to catch, and it's with Nuri, it's violent.
Hmm.
It's really, and this one is especially hard because they show things that in other comics book they do not show. The runner is Sylvain Vallée, and Nuri and Vallée make Once Upon a Time in France.
Yes.
Uh, it uh, during World War II,
Right.
and it was violent. But here it's more violent, and I will show you. Uh,
As usually there are for French books. Nudity and violence. Yes, please, more of it.
like you can, I think you can.
A little bit closer to the camera if you can, so you can pick up some of those details you're explaining.
Well, right. Well, here it's
Yeah,
better.
you can show the violent bits. It's not a problem.
Well,
I see a skirt going up.
well, I really like. I think Nuri is really one of the best, and it's um, it's comics for adults, but it's good,
Yes.
really good.
This is the same Nuri that worked on Je suis Légion, right?
Yes, the same one.
Cool.
We are legion.
Uh, well, a little surprise. Zep, maybe you know him. He make Titeuf with a comedy, a comedy comics.
Right.
Well known. It's one of the bestseller. Yeah, and he did this graphic novel, The End,
Hmm.
and it's about the end of humanity.
Mm.
Uh, because
Speak my interest straight away.
yes, and I think if no one told me Zepp did this album, I wouldn't believe it because it's far away from his work. You say, and you can say he used only one color.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Yes,
Got it.
yeah, it's right. So, and it's very good, very interesting, and for it changed. It was really changed. Maybe for up, yeah, encore une. Up, another one.
Yep.
Voilà. All right. And the last one was a little surprise. Um, Il faut
Ramirez.
flinguer Ramirez. In English, I think you would say Ramirez must die.
Right, yeah. Must kill
Nicolas
Ramirez.
Petrimo, and it's a story about organized crime. Well, this guy here,
Hmm.
Mexican organized crime thing, is a former hitman called Ramirez who betrayed the organization, and so they try to kill him, but it's not as easy as they thought. And it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie
Hmm.
or Robert Rodriguez, the both.
Yes.
Really, it's very it's great. It's um, there is comedy moment, there is dramatic moment, and it's very action and well, one really I really like it.
So it has that Tarantino vibe in the dialogue.
Yes, and the dialogue and the mood of the album. Really, you think you read it and you say, "Hey, it's like a Tarantino film." You think because there is I don't there is something in the well, first you have the story. I said, Mexican gangs who try to kill another former uh, hitman,
Mhm.
and so there's violence like in the
Yeah,
Tarantino
cathartic
film,
violence.
but
Yeah,
yeah, but there is well, it's
kind
hard
of
to explain, but
a humor, kind of
yes, you think
spice,
really you
spice
read
to
it
the
and you say, well, Tarantino could make a film with it, or
absolutely.
Robert Rodriguez too.
Well, that's the thing I find in a lot of French work. They're quite cinematic, a lot of them. I mean, in their own way. But one question about these books that you've just presented, they seem massive. I mean, they seem like 150 pages plus. All of them, I think most of them, and these guys, these authors, they're all young guys. They're not veterans of the industry, are they?
Yes. This one is.
Now, for anyone else outside of Europe, most of these books have one writer and one artist, right? And either traditionally or digitally, the artist usually takes charge of all the whole art department. So we'll be doing the lines and the colors as well, either painted or digitally done. Is that correct?
Yes, you have so, but you have people who colorize, who only colorize. Sometimes the drawner do not get
All
the
right. Okay.
color.
So sometimes, all right, got it. But still, a lot of the authors in Europe, in France, a lot of the artists. Well, actually, this will be more of a question. What is the percentage of the artists that actually finalize their artwork completely? So they actually colorize it again, either traditionally or digitally, as opposed to the other ones that will pass it on to a colorist, most likely to finish it off digitally. What is the percentage? Is it most of the artists still do all the work, or now is it 50, kind of a 50-50 thing between the actual drawer
Yeah.
and the actual colorist?
Well, it depends. Some well, if you take Gregor Rosinski by example, who were the artist for Torgal. Do you know Torgal?
I heard about it, but that's
Yes.
pretty much it.
All right. Um, it's so if first f- first album he may he drawn, and after that there is a colorist who get the color on the. But the last years he stopped that and he paint. In fact, he was painting really, and so there were I think a lot of so you have artists who uh, start with black and white, uh, did not you did not make the colors, and little by little make paint. In fact,
Hmm.
but I think I'm, I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe yes. Uh,
I mean, the only reason I was asking was really because, to me personally, the work done in Europe is always more traditional. So throughout the ages, throughout the decades, I always felt that first of all, the most of the stuff I used to read, the creators used to do everything. They used to do the writing and the art. And when he was, for example, I mentioned Francois-Bourgeon before we started, which he's one of those guys that kind of writes and does the art. But then I'm thinking about Vincent Segrelis from Spain, and it's a guy that actually does oil paintings, and each one of the panels in the page is actually an oil painting, and Vincent Segrelis does everything from top to bottom in the book. And and that, I think that was always one of the richest things about the work done in Europe, is that is uh, consistently is a an extensive traditional work in terms of the presentation of the art. Obviously, now with digital colors, things have changed and things become more easier in one side. But that's why I was wondering what was still the ratio, what was the percentage
well,
of what was actually on
I really
sale.
don't. I have to confess, I don't know.
For
There,
another time.
but there is artists who do everything. Yes, it exists, but how many? I don't know.
All right. Well, is there any more books you wanted to share with us?
No, it was the last one.
That was the last one. That's fine. Well, I'll be looking forward for some more of your new videos, maybe on some of those books. I'm quite interested about the one set in Africa, the one with the
Yeah,
violent scenes.
yeah. Maybe I will make an episode about it. My next episode will be about the Smurf,
Oh yes, Smurfs. Yes, of course, another classic.
the female Smurf.
Sorry, the
The well, la Schtroumpfette, the female Smurf.
the final one.
Yeah,
Why everybody dies? I love violence. I like to see what happens to the Smurfs. What's
yeah.
what's the name of the bad guy? I forget it.
Gargamel.
Oh yes, the Gargamel. Yes, will he finally become victor? I mean, he really is a road runner kind of chemistry, isn't it? He's always trying.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Well, we usually like to keep these things between an hour and a half. We're close to get to an hour and a half, so maybe we're going on for some closing thoughts now. I just want to pass the word back to Paulo, just for him to tell me where do you see the comic book industry in Portugal? Again, we're a little bit generous in calling it an industry, but obviously you have mentioned these creators, you've mentioned these imprint houses coming out with things. I mean, obviously, the con in Coimbra might be organized by the guy that runs the library, and one of the publishers there is some people that own their own comic book shop, which is quite interesting. But where do you see the next 10, 15 years taking the creators in Portugal? I'm interested because if I'm going to go back and work there in that industry, I need to know.
Well, since we understand that comic books in Portugal are always a niche product, nobody's really expecting to make a lot of money here. Uh, as long as we have a stable number of customers for the foreseeable future, not much is going to change. Uh, there are avenues where you can buy the product. There are publishing houses interested in putting out product. So while it will never be a big sales success, for the moment, we're going to stay as it is. I imagine that the majority of new creators are going to feel attracted to the American market, and a few will try to follow the steps of what André Lima Araújo or Miguel Montenegro or Jorge Coelho have done. And because those that try to do that, they actually want to be professional comic book artists. So here we're used to getting the scraps, so and we know how to do a good product with the scraps, so it will survive.
I mean, but will they mostly be looking to work in the international market? Because again, I'm wondering about the sustainability of the actual European, the actual Portuguese market, or are those artists and creators which become successful there immediately are fished out of the pond and go work
They're not so
to
much
other shores?
they're not so much fished. The all the guys that the books that I've shown you, they're creators. They work. They have 9 to 5 jobs, so they put out comics because they want to. They're not going to be um, annoyed that they're not going to make it big. They know that they're not going to make it big. It's it's going to be young people who want to be professionals, who will try to get their work seen by mostly American publishers, maybe a few French ones, although I know that the French are not as open to foreign authors uh, getting in as the Americans are. Especially because the Americans are always use the foreigners as cheaper labor. Remember what happened to the Filipinos,
Yes.
and the same happened with the Brazilians. So the Portuguese ones that are they will want to do this professionally. They will always try to get published in the United States first.
Yes. Well, come on, the Filipinos and the Brazilians are next on my list. Yeah, I haven't used them yet. Yeah, but they're definitely next on my list. Okay, well, so I'll just pass on to Frederick, and he can have his closing thoughts on whatever you like to say about the French industry, and then we're finishing this off. Uh, what else would you think this is going to? Because obviously you mentioned the high competition of the American and the Japanese comics, and there, although you have quoted those impressive numbers in the beginning, it seems that there is a steady decline. But again, that has been worldwide as well with the digital comics coming in. But where do you see the future? Where do you see the next 10 years, Frederick?
Um, well, uh, I, I think, well, um, you know, uh, before we have all superhero movies, um, not a lot of people was reading comics, and and after with all these films of Marvel and DC films, people discover the characters, and so so people discover the characters and come. Well, we will see if the films keep successful. And well, today no, yesterday Captain Marvel was out on the theaters in Belgium, and so. But we have to. We will see. And the problem is with American comics. It's sometimes it's very complicated because you have Marvel, by example. You have different universe, and for an European, a Belgian readers, it's hard to know to where the story start, where the story end, because yeah, there's too many universe, and you you
Yeah,
need you
that's
need a
always been
guide.
a problem.
You
Yeah.
need a guide to say so. But
Hmm.
we talk about Enrico Marini, and maybe it will happen. You will have uh, a European artist who will work on American characters or on Japanese characters, and maybe we'll have this mix. And I don't know what you think about the Dark Prince Charming person, but I like it. I really like it. But I don't know. It's interesting what uh, in America or in England, what people think about the Dark Prince Charming.
I don't know it. I mean, most all those books that you showed to me, I'm completely out of the loop. Probably Paulo he knows more about that. Anything you wanted to say about that?
Portuguese edition out, but I haven't picked it up yet. The I have a limited budget for comics, and sometimes it's more what catches my fancy at a particular moment. So I end up leaving stuff for a later day. But and then sometimes I just miss out completely. But I know that the books have been published in Portugal, and they look great. And having known Marini from his previous series, like Rapaz, I definitely recommend that you give it a look.
All right. Okay. Well,
Okay,
me and for everyone listening, obviously. Go ahead.
okay. So, well, I think if a European publisher find a way to react to if we have uh, talented artists, I think yes, we French Belgian comics can survive and can do some can survive, yes, and can maybe get back uh, in the first place. Um, but yes, it's a we'll see. It's hard to it's hard to we have to we have to believe that publishers will be smart enough to find solutions and yes and save the industry. But I think um, you know p- in Belgium and in France, people love these books. The But the problem is maybe they don't uh, they don't give interest to the new one, and that's the problem. Maybe if little by little we can say to people, well, we want to make great comics, French Belgian comics with American or Japanese as inspirations. It's not a problem. Um, and try to and hope that people we go to this kind of publication.
Hmm.
Why not?
Well, one final question I had: these titles that you show there, I mean, they selling a lot in terms of numbers? And because obviously, like you just mentioned, some of them are geared to adults, and some of them seem to have more of a cult following than a big mainstream following. So these particular titles that you showed, are they selling in very large numbers?
Pa- 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 uh, I think hello. Well, this one, the end, I think not a lot because Rue de Sèvres, the publisher, is not it's not well known. It's not a great publisher like Dupuis or Casterman or Dargaud.
Hmm.
Um, yes. Yeah. Katanga, yes. I think it was one of the bestseller. Uh, yes, Seul, Alone. Yeah, it works really. It's people. It's one of the most acclaimed, and it was adapted by for cinema.
Right. So
Um,
although they're still geared at an adult audience, that they have enough mainstream appeal to be able to shift some decent numbers, basically.
yes, maybe.
Okay, well, it seems that again the glory days are gone. It's just we're just looking for another RJ, isn't it? We're just looking for another Goshini. In the end of the day, it seems to be mostly that. Like physics are looking for another Einstein. All right, well, guys, I think we'll conclude this here today. So thank you very much for dropping by, and I look forward to seeing your next videos on Paul Costa on national product. Definitely very interested in that, and Frederic Pagano on what is being released in France and Belgium. So, all right. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for
Thank
everyone
you.
that is
Thank you.
watching. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for coming. And we'll see you, everybody, on the next Louis Michael show. I'm not sure what uh, will be next. But most likely will be another creator from the US coming. And yeah, if you have dropped by, either just been watching us or will watch us later on, just press the like thumbs up, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. So every time we go live or there's a new video uploaded, you'll drop by and spend a little bit more time here, see what we got on offer. All right. Thank you very much from everyone. Until another time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.